important to provide some framing context as to why research for content is important, and ultimately why bother. To my mind, there are a few things, Katie, that really drive that. Ultimately, it's about catalysing your content marketing and the associated strategy, as well as those demand gen drivers. Equally, it's got to be about those financials and directly driving those bottom line commercials. And that's about creating impactful, engaging outputs, which will really help some of your key set piece activities and events. And that's really helping you to differentiate some of your content from the morass of noise already within the marketplace, to my mind.
Definitely, I would completely agree, and I think being able to reinforce that thought leadership piece, that's probably one of the key things that research for content can help with. It really, as you say, sets you apart. It can really make you sort of jump to the front of the race, if it were. So yeah, really focusing on that, that thought leadership positioning, and really, I guess, reinforcing those commercial discussions. And we'll come on to talk about some other things later, but I think actually that commercial element and linking it back to ROI, I think is such a strong point, which links very nicely to the demand generation, which you already mentioned, Scott. But being able to really drive that demand generation by using the assets that you've created, you're a thought leader in the market, you've got these strong assets, you can really help generate that demand and keep that momentum going throughout the entire year.
In setting yourself up for success when it comes to research for content activity, there's some core principles which, in our experience, it's important to draw upon. And critically, it's about the objectives. Clearly understand what you're looking to achieve. The objectives need to be front and center in everything that you're doing. It's going to frame all of the subsequent activity. And what do I mean by that? It's understanding what you want in terms of the campaign topics and those areas that you're looking to focus in on. It's about understanding what your target audience, and I believe, Katie, you'll touch on that maybe a bit later, and also understanding the channels that you're looking to employ and activate when you're looking to maximise the impact of this type of activity. And in terms of also, it's imperative that you think about what success also looks like for you. What are the metrics that you're going to look to measure that success? Is it impressions? Is it page views? Is it article downloads? Or microsite visits? Ultimately, is it movement within your stock price?
Definitely. There's so many different things to think about when it comes to that area, and they feed into every aspect of the project. And we always like to start with the sample area. So sample considerations are going to drive everything that you do within the project, because you want to make sure you're talking to not just the right respondents, but the right number of respondents. And that always linked to things like territories or verticals. There's so many different areas to think about. So when you're thinking about your objectives, and you really want to get to the core of which verticals is it you want to hit, are there specific territories you want to be involved with, and then that will drive who it is you want to talk to. And then once you've done that part, then you get to the fun part. So you start designing your questionnaire. Again, that's when your objectives come in, because you want to make sure you're writing questions that are going to really hit home and hit your objectives that you want to look at. And it's so key to really involve your research partner into those conversations, because you want them to understand what your objectives are. You want them to be embedded into your ethos for this project, so that you can then trust them to go forward and write you a questionnaire that's going to really hit the objectives that you want. You're able to, construct questions that can get you to multiple different data points. So there is, those sort of considerations to think about. There are, of course, other things to think about as well in terms of, how many questions, what's the sweet spot. And I know we kind of look at, it's around 25 questions, or between 10 to 12 minutes in length. And those are the type of areas that we want to consider when we're building a questionnaire.
The analysis is incredibly important as well. If we take an intelligent look at that and approach to it, then we can really extend the life of the study and really maximise value. So what do I mean by that? That is about, yes, giving your initial PR bang, supported by those hard numbers and those headlines, that's great. But let's look to extend that, feed the Marcom's narratives across those forthcoming months, the next 3, 6, 9 months. If we slice and dice the data and undertake some deep dives into some of those subsets, be that audiences or regions, truly sweating that data, if you like.
The final phase you have to think about when you're doing a really compelling research for content project is to think about the deliverables. And the way we categorise those is into 3, sort of sections. You've got your kind of written deliverables that kind of really go in on the written side of things. You've got your visual elements to think about that really sort of play up the more graphic areas, and then you've also got your in-person events, which are always very fun to do. So we'll start by looking at the written content, and I guess that really can be seen as your hero asset of the piece. We're thinking something like a white paper, an ebook, or maybe a series of blogs, even exec summaries. There are all ways in which you can really draw upon the data. You can keep them very top level. So maybe looking at just the global results, but then you can really drill down into some of the more interesting areas too. Maybe there's a nice organisation size split. Are the enterprises doing something different to the small businesses? So that's something you can really play on when you're looking at written content like ebooks or white papers, and they can be really well supported by the visual elements. So infographics are probably the go-to place to look at. They really enable you to distill the information that you've got written in your white paper or your ebook into such a real graphical presentation. You've got maybe 10 to 15 stats there, and they tell a story but very visually, and I think they can really help with social media, for example. You can split some of those up into tiles, and it's just a little bite-sized element that you can put into social media that links someone to the longer infographic or even to the ebook, and that again helps bring to your sort of demand generation element as well. So it all kind of links back in nicely, which is good. And then thinking about, I guess, the in-person element. Obviously, we webinars as well. It doesn't have to be, in the same room. It's all very much virtual these days. So webinars are a great way to further push your data. You can get even more legs out of it. You could perhaps launch in Q4 and then refresh it in Q1 with a webinar and relaunch it again, maybe using some different stats. And one thing that we love to do as researchers is to sit on those webinars. We can go in as the research expert, and I think it really helps to add gravitas, not only to the research but also to the webinar. And it just shows the different ways in which the data can be used, and it's great to have that independent voice.
Couldn't agree more. I think there's also, to my mind, there are some final aspects to bear in mind. Learnings, I guess, we've picked up over the years. I mean, ask yourself these questions before you really get involved with your research for content activity. Are your stakeholders fully on board? To my mind, that's critical. You've got to corral those thoughts right up front. That will inform everything that you do. Ensure your base size is robust enough. At one level, you think that's a fairly obvious point and statement to make, but you'd be surprised how many people go with too small or thinner base. It's got to be credible and got to be able to gain PR attention. If not, why bother doing it in the first place? It's a complete waste of time, money and resources. And finally, have you lined up your comms agency? Quite often we operate in that tripartite relationship with ourselves, a comms agency and the end client. Get them involved up front. That can help frame elements, and equally it will then really amplify the noise and the bang that you get with the outputs. So those are just a few final thoughts to bear in mind.